It was a rough weekend for the UConn men, but as we've suggested to Dan Hurley, don't go change it. You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a moment to say how thankful we are for all of you. We appreciate all of your support. We're proud to say we're the only daily podcast covering the UConn men's and women's basketball programs, the hoops capital of the world, and we're thrilled to bring you the coverage you deserve. And to show that gratitude, we're giving back. We're donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids to UConn games. Well, Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, in today's episode of Locked On UConn, we'll dive deep into Dan Hurley's recent interview with Adam Finklestein, breaking down key takeaways and his thoughts on media narratives, his coaching style, the challenges of maintaining excellence at UConn. And we'll also explore Hurley's relentless approach and how some of that development doesn't really vibe with today's social norms. And that's okay because we love it. We are going to have Adam Finklestein on to discuss his interview with Dan Hurley. And also, why not? He's the director of scouting at 24/7. We're going to break down the incoming monster class. And so that is featuring Braylon Mullins, Darius Adams, Eric Riva, and Jacob Furphy. So without further ado, let's welcome to the program Director of Scouting at 24/7 at 247 Sports and a college basketball insider for CBS Sports headquarters, Adam Finklestein. All right, we're back with Adam Finklestein. As we introed him, he is the Director of Scouting at 247 Sports and also a college basketball insider for CBS Sports headquarters. All right, Adam, you interviewed Dan. We had immediate availability with him last Friday before they played the game in Cincinnati at Xavier. The first thing that struck me when I listened to the interview was he said it felt like this season's felt like 3 or 4 seasons. Is this like roller coaster nature of this season wearing him down to levels that he probably hasn't felt before?
I don't think to levels he hasn't felt before. I think it is emotionally and physically taxing on these guys. I mean, I'll say this. I have a lot of friends who are college coaches, and during the course of the season, I don't call them. And it's easy for, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. And when you are as obsessive about it as, the UConn staff is, that gets even more magnified. So yeah, I'm sure it is really taxing physically, emotionally, and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, man. Like I have a lot of coaching friends from various levels in the D1 world. And you're right. Like I'll shoot them a text. Hey, great game. That's it. Like I don't ever have like a conversation in season. It's a great call out. Hurley mentioned media members at practice often seem more interested in breaking news than observing the workouts. Do you get a sense of his frustration with that shift kind of in sports journalism?
Well, so a couple things there. Listen, I've been in the media for, I don't know, 15 years or something, but I've always been careful, deliberate not to portray myself as a reporter. It's not my skill set. It's also not like the way I want to live, sure. I don't want my phone to be, I don't want to be at my phone's, be responsible to my phone 24 hours a day. But some of those people who make a living are, and it is, and they are also, like, the popularity of college basketball is due in some small part to the people who help, tell the stories of it.
Sure.
So I think that's one thing, like, we have to acknowledge, like, those people are just trying to make their living too. And a lot of times that's how they do it. I do think, and I said this, and I said it knowing that I might get some flack from, people in the media. I do find it surprising that UConn has been so advanced over the course of the last couple of years in their tactics, and yet they get very few questions about their tactics. Listen, Dan's obviously a huge personality, and so that is inevitably going to be a talking point. But it's like they also run the most sophisticated offensive system in college basketball. They also were one of the things I asked them was about transition defense versus offensive rebounding, because 5 years ago, every great coach in the country would tell you can't be good at both. You have to pick what you're good at. And Dan and UConn were one of maybe 3 programs in the country that flipped that script. I've never heard anyone ask him about that. So I do think there's a part where it's like, hey, the people telling the stories, at some point we have to acknowledge that a big part of his brilliance is what they're able to do schematically, and those are stories worth telling too.
No, I agree. I would love to. Maybe you can put in a good word for me. I'd love to have a fully basketball related conversation, because I've done it. I've done it with a couple of his recruits that we're going to get to later in the year. I was talking to Braylon about how he fits in the offense, and Eric, and coming off ball screen. So would love to do that with him at a later date. So,
and Mark, I will tell you this: that was the majority of the conversation was going to be about this. Like, our interview for Wednesday was already scheduled.
Okay.
And then the whole Butler thing happens, and it goes viral and all that, and it's like, hey, we probably got to talk about this, right? So we ended up talking less about basketball than I had expected, because there's enough people talking about what he does on the sideline that I don't need to tell that story. I also don't particularly want to tell that story. I'm interested in the basketball. So that's it. It just ended up being a circumstantial timing that we had to kind of address that stuff.
And that's totally fair. And listen, I am a person that it makes a living doing this now. And I think, I think there's a part of me that doesn't want to always dive into, the personality stuff, but I also know that as you mentioned, he's a big personality, and he's interesting. Like there's things that I would want to ask him basketball related, but there's also things that I want to ask him that are to let him know that UConn fans specifically for our show support him. Like I asked him a question on Friday, in the Zoom, that just said, do you know how much UConn fans like support you? Because that was the question I got the most. Like I'll do a mailbag and say, what question, if I have a immediate availability, do you want Dan Hurley to answer for the fan base? And that was the question. Does he feel that support in times like this when it feels like the barbarians are at the gate? And
I asked him something similar. Yeah, I said, because I asked him like how he makes himself so relatable. Because this is like, to pull back the curtain a little bit. Like I said, like I'm a basketball guy, and when we're doing these interviews, because last week it was Shaka Smart, 2 weeks earlier it was Nate Oates, and what I'm trying to learn, and my employers are trying to teach me, is like how to ask questions the right way. When I want to be like, hey man, tell me about your offense, and you can't ask, ask it that way. But what I was really trying to get at was, I feel like the more controversial he gets, the more the UConn fans love him. And also that I think he has become, I think a lot of UConn fans find him extremely relatable, because they appreciate the fact that he's so invested. They know, by his own admission, like this is a point I keep making, like if you watch my interview with him, he used words like regret. He used, like he acknowledged that sometimes he goes over the line. Like he knows it, but he's trying to like control that fire that burns with him and make it burn at like just the right temperature. And I think the other thing is, like, when he goes too far, it's about who has the right to tell him. And like, candidly, it's not me, or, anybody who hasn't walked in those shoes before. You know what I mean? So it's like, if Gino wants to tell him, if Calhoun wants to tell him, if his wife or kids want to tell him, fair game. If his players want to tell him, if it's me, you, or anybody else in that press conference, like, we don't know what he's going through on a daily basis. So I think that was part of it too. We're
going to go to a break, but that is a fantastic point. It's I don't know if you're a parent, I'm a parent. Yeah. It's like, to me, an analogy for that would be, if my kid is acting out at a party and another parent tries to scold them, like in a way that I feel is disrespectful, I'm going to say, no, that's my job. I'm going to do that, because 100%. First off, my kids don't ever do that. But if they did, they know they're going to have to answer to me. So I think that's a great point. We're gonna get to the break, and we're gonna talk about Hurley's coaching style and a couple other questions here with Adam before we get into the monster class of 2025 coming up after the break. This message is from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes, we're waiting and wondering and worrying if we're going to get any money back or if we have to own. Oh, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now taxes is matched with TurboTax Expert, who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates in their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All with getting the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantee. All right, we're back with Adam Finklestein of 247 Sports. All right, Adam, we kind of touched on your interview, the personality piece, some of the frustration from probably some of the media talking heads that have kind of gone after Dan. Do you get the sense? And I think you're obviously one of his, a person in the media that he respects and trusts, because I even read the transcripts through this where, you guys had a nice exchange at the end talking about family and things like that. That he's going to be more careful with who he decides to jump on a show with going forward, or do you think he won't care going? I don't know how to ask that question, but I think he may shy away from certain outlets.
He said it at the end. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like a it was in reference to like my daughter being thrilled that he was on the show. I don't, I mean, he said it, so I assume so. But here's the thing. He's the biggest personality in college basketball and the biggest name in college coaching. And this is a sport that has historically been dominated by big personalities in college coaching. So it's good for the sport when he talks to people. Because there is no Coach K. There isn't, we could go through the line of people who've stepped down. Like, it's Dan Hurley right now. Like, he's the biggest name in the sport. And he has people talking about college basketball in a week when we were going into the AFC and NFC playoffs. So like that doesn't usually happen, just from the perspective of like someone who's worked in the media. So, people are going to continue to cover him. And I know he said like, put the camera on the other guy. Like, the average fan doesn't care about the other guy. I mean, I'm just like, whether you're UConn fans or not. I mean, so it kind of, so I don't know what he'll do, but I do know that like, people want to hear from him.
That's for sure. He mentioned something about the dark side of coaching intensity. And that's a quote from it. Like, how do you think he's going to manage that? I think you touched on a little bit because I did an entire show about this, about how the relatability is, in particular for myself. I was a professional athlete. I know how hard that fire burns. And even when I do this now, I can get too hot and I have to try to pull myself back. So how does he try to manage it? I mean, I do it through working out, through, some type of meditation, but sometimes it doesn't work.
So he's talked about that a lot, like his dad. So when I do these interviews, my goal is to not ask questions that have already been asked. Yep. Actually, Shaka and I had a conversation about this, more so than Dan, because so many people have asked Dan about this, but he's talked a lot about his morning routines and about his, his meditation, his prayer, his, sometimes if I, he and I, I know there are different things. He shouted out like Float 41 before with the float tanks and stuff like that. I love that place too. So I think there's a lot of things that he does to make sure that he is in the best frame of mind possible. And like I said, I didn't ask him about it because I know he's talked about it in other places. But I do think that's more normal. And one of the things I really respect about him is that he has been open about, some of the struggles he had. If you notice the shirt he was wearing in my interview, I think it said something like "therapy is good" or something like that. I should have, and I didn't ask him about it. But I mean, it's like it's not just him too. Like these guys, these people who coach at this level are so wired, so competitive, so obsessive in a lot of ways that they have to figure out ways to find some balance. And I think that part is relatable too. Maybe not, like people like you and me may not play at the same stakes that he does, but I think
Right.
everybody's, they're trying to figure out like, hey, how can I be the best version of myself and be the most productive version of myself, but also like, find some balance. And I think that's another part of him that's very, very relatable to a lot of people.
Yeah. I always joke around. I got to find the balance to not scare my children when I cover sports. So I have to at least leave the room. But so his coaching style, he's completely changed from being this kind of like rock fight, defensive battle coach where, almost like Kelvin Sampson-esque, where it's like, if you get offense, you get offense, but we're going to shut you down every game.
Right.
How do you see that going forward? I mean, we're going to talk about this recruiting class and has a lot of talent coming in. Is he always, because I think the fear of UConn, old school UConn fans who like love Calhoun's 1990 team for the press and the fiery nature of Calhoun from a defensive standpoint, and Dan isn't losing that. But I guess my question to you is, this team defensively is not very good, and
right.
do you think that it's is that going to get better, and two, as time goes on, are we going to see this type of defense more from Hurley's teams where their offenses are super efficient, but defense is kind of like, where they're trying, the effort's there. I saw the effort against Xavier. It's definitely not an effort issue. It's just more about grasping the rotational concepts of his defensive schemes.
Yeah. So the question is like, will they improve defensively?
Will they improve defensively? And do you think that UConn fans expect like this kind of like slip in the defensive because we're so focused on how efficient we are in offense?
No, I think the defense is going to improve. One, I think it'll improve once you get Liam back, just because you'll get another big wing there. I mean, I think Liam's a better offensive player than he is defensively, but he just gives you some size, physicality, some switchability. But no, UConn's offense is elite, and I think you mentioned something in there that he talked about when I interviewed him about how he evolved offensively. And because the question I asked him, it stemmed from a question JJ Redick asked him. He asked him about being able to run different actions out of different alignments. So
right.
the play can look different to start, but you're getting to a similar kind of action. But what strikes me about their offensive system is the various ways they can get out of it. So they have so many different counters throughout the course of these very complicated sets, where they could six passes in, they'll get a back cut, or 5 passes or 4 screens in, they'll slip it, or 4 screens in, instead of using the screen, they'll reject it. And it's all these things that make them really difficult to prepare for. And that's another thing I hadn't heard anyone ask him about before. And I think that those nuances are part of what makes them so special offensively. Like you watch even the Purdue game, like, it'd be like pass. They're just trying to keep up with the action. All of a sudden they slip and they get a dunk, Now, part of that is reliant on your personnel. You have to have players who can understand how to play in that action and make those reads, and also have the versatility so that defenses have to guard them different ways. They have to respect their ability to pop and roll to the rim at the same time, just to oversimplify it. As far as the defensive end goes, no, I don't. I think they're going to be good defensively again. I think it's going to be incremental. Is this year's team going to get to the level of last year's team? Of course not. But are they going to be better than they are right now? I think they will. And then, in subsequent years, will they return to the levels we've seen previously? Sure. Because, this is not, I hear your question as like, will this be who they are moving forward?
Yes.
And my answer to that would be no. Like, if you that just goes back to his mentality. Like, this is not what he's going to accept.
No, it's totally fair. But yeah, thank you for crystallizing it. You're better at questions than I am.
Not at all. Not at all.
No, I'm going to ask you one last thing about this year's team in particular.
Yep.
He mentioned, I don't even think it was in your interview, it was more just kind of before it, and it was before the Xavier game. Not much changed. I felt like they played better overall, even though they lost the game in a tight one. But there just doesn't seem to be a lot of freedom of movement when they can create all these actions. They are getting held a ton. Like there's some frustration for him there too. And I think that's part of why he's losing his mind sometimes on the sidelines. It's not because of he's just trying to get after refs. It's that, he feels like some of these games have been taken. So can you speak on that? I think there's definitely
yeah I think that's a good point. Like when people talk about the officiating, and again, if you can kind of get through, if you can synthesize what he's saying sometimes to like the main see the big points, and I think that you just hit the nail on the head. Like this is not a this is not a great dribble drive team. When Liam gets back, they'll be better because Liam is one of those versatile guys who can dribble, pass, shoot. Like if you don't close out hard, he's going to make the three. If you run him off the line, he's gonna get a paint touch and make the right read, or get fouled. He has a pretty high free throw rate. But what they are, and what I think they will continue to be offensively, is a very good movement cutting team. And those plays are not being officiated with the same, there's a lot more pulling and fouling and stuff allowed off the ball than there is on the ball. There's not the same attention to detail off the ball. And that is, I think, his point. Like if we can't get open off a screen, it disadvantages us just like it disadvantages the other team if we're hand checking them or putting two hands on them when they're trying to drive. I think sure. That is the point. I think that's a fair point, and that has to be taken into consideration. Like you said, like they're not great defensively right now. They do foul, and there probably is some personal bias in there somewhere. Not everywhere, but somewhere. So you put all those things together, and I think that's kind of where you get the free throw differential.
For sure. All right. I appreciate you breaking that down. We're going to take one more break and then come back and talk about the 2025 recruiting class, the monster class, as Dan has called it, coming up after this. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, you can even do the coin toss. FanDuel makes it easy to get in the action. You could even do the length of the national anthem, over under. From the thrill of kickoff to the final whistle, live betting is also a big feature that I personally like to do. It's right in the app. It's super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app, head to FanDuel.com to get started. Just bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with Adam Finklestein of 247 Sports in a CBS Basketball Insider. All right, my friend, this class, I covered it this a little bit this year too. Really excited about it. What's your overall assessment of this recruiting class compared to maybe some past classes? The Steph Castle class that still has all the sophomores there. How would you compare it to that and just overall?
I think Braylon is an immediate impact player who could potentially start as a freshman. He's got, first of all, he may be the best shooter in high school basketball. Second of all, he's got like that competitive edge that is just I think the secret sauce to being, when you're skilled and fiery, it seems to work really well, like Liam is. So I think he's a stud. UConn fans are gonna love him. And then Darius and Eric are very good players, but they're not starting caliber players from day one. They're gonna be guys who are gonna grow into bigger roles as they go on. Darius has got a really good combination of backcourt size, skill, and
Mm-hmm.
feel. He's trying to transition from more of like a two guard into more of a combo guard. He's going to have to get bigger, stronger, and more explosive. That's going to be part of his transition. Eric is a highly skilled southpaw center, and he's going to be great in all of UConn's offensive actions because he can shoot it, he can pass it. He's actually a terrific ball handler for his size. He's got some athletic limitations that are going to he's going to have to figure out how to get his conditioning and his mobility and stuff to a higher level so that he can impact the game defensively. The talent is there. It's just, so I think with Eric and Darius, it's going to be similar to what we've seen with some of the guys who have come in. It's like, okay, you're going to learn and try and make strides. And then it's like, I think Dan has said this, like, are you going to be obsessed with it? Are you going to be, however he words it, are you going to be a dog, or are you going to be a player, and it's going to be like, how much did they buy in on that end? I think Braylon is already there.
Okay. There's one guy, and I'm glad you didn't talk about him yet because he's kind of like the mystery guy.
Oh, the Australian,
which is Jacob Furphy, right?
Yep.
And I actually think I've only watched film of him. I've never seen him in person, right?
Yeah, me
too. I think a lot of us feel that way, right? But he's almost got the Dan Hurley ready body coming in. He's 6'6", 220.
It may not be a great 220 though.
That may be true. But he's not the typical like high school kid, like some of these guys are coming in like 6'5", $170. You know what I mean? Like, so
he's the wild card. He's the wild card. Like, we don't really know what to expect. He's not really playing anywhere right now. The concern with him is body type and athleticism. The pluses with him are skill, feel, size, and from what I've heard, that like he's got that competitive gene too. So I think the UConn strength and conditioning program, what they've done probably best over the years is get guys in shape. So I think that there is a path, like theoretically, because as I said, I haven't seen him in person. It's been all on film, and that's a great way to screw up an evaluation. But so theoretically, there's a path for him to figure it out. And when you're talking, and I also think this is like, UConn has played without prototypical point guards for several years. Like Tristan Newton, as good as he was down the stretch, when he first came here, no one was calling him a pure point guard. Hassan Diarra is not a pure point guard. He was not even a point guard. Like, I've watched him since he was in high school. Competitor, warrior, absolutely. But like pure point guard, never. So how do they do that? They do it with really high processing, smart wings and forwards. Guys like Steph Castle, Alex Caravan, Liam McNeely, guys who can read the game like a point guard can, and are sometimes your best facilitators, even if they don't necessarily bring the ball up the floor. This guy could theoretically fit in that same kind of mold from a processing standpoint. So he's going to be a really interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I'm super interested. They got not only Eric with his being a southpaw, but he's also a southpaw. He kind of gives me, he's a little bit shorter, but he kind of gives me that. Can't think of his name off the top of my head. He played for the Jazz, lefty.
Joe Ingles.
Yes, and again, this is just all watching YouTube clips. Like it just reminds me of him, and I know it's probably a lazy take because they're both 6'7" white dudes, but you know what I mean? Like, it just but that's what popped into my head.
I'll say this too, Mark. I think the expectation should be that UConn is going to hit the portal hard because they're losing 4 starters. If I'm right, they've got 1 starting caliber freshman coming in. And, some of these guys that are here right now that have eligibility left, like we've got to see some growth.
Right. Well, that was one of the, this is why you're good at your job. This is the question I was going to ask, which is, this monster class is, to quote Dan, do you think they're going to kind of push some of the guys that are on this team to potentially, test the portal out away from UConn, and then obviously UConn is going to be looking in the portal too. I think they are going to hit the portal hard. But you think you're going to lose guys in the portal this year too? I mean, for better or for worse.
I will say this: I have never known UConn to push anyone out.
Right, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. No, and I understand that, but I think that's an important point to make, because in this day and age, especially in this day and age, and even before, like, listen, I coached. I coached Division I, I don't know, 18 years ago now. And like that used to happen all the time. Like you weren't getting it done. And it's like you had to kind of do it the right way. But everybody would be like, hey, maybe it's time for you to look into other options. Sure. I don't think that happens at UConn. And you even listen, he talks about how these are wonderful guys and stuff like that. That doesn't, but there's not getting pushed out. And then are you a starting caliber player for a team that aspires to contend for national championships on an annual basis? Those are two different things. So now, and then do those players decide like, hey, maybe I want to be in a place where I can, it's not so intense. Like, I think you have to be a certain kind of guy to want to be in this system and play. Like I keep using the word obsessiveness, and I mean it in a largely complimentary way. Like you've got to have that mentality, like that Cam Spencer mentality, to really, be a great fit here. So do some of them decide that like, hey, maybe I'll see if there's a more relaxed setting? Maybe. I don't know that. I don't think anyone's going to get pushed out. And I do think that they will look for, they have to replace 4 starters. And if my math is correct, they're returning 1. They're bringing 1 in out of the high school ranks. And so that's 3 spots up for grabs, whether it's internally or somebody out of the portal.
Totally fair. Last question before we get you out of here. You mentioned Braylon. He's easily the fan favorite so far of this group. I've had him on the show. I've had Eric on the show. We're going to get Darius on. I don't think we're going to be able to get Jacob on because he's in parts unknown.
You would have thought Eric like dropping that when he announced with me.
F-bomb?
When he dropped, yeah. I was like, please don't get me in trouble. It's not a bit. Yeah. CBS frowns on that, but
and so does Locked On. So I'm with you there because I did. One of my co-hosts owns a apparel company, Exit 68. I'll give him a shout out here. Made him a shirt. And it said "happy to be," and it with the German flag on a basketball. And so, he bought it and was super excited about it. Wore it on the show and all this other stuff. So, he's definitely up. I think the fans feel like Braylon is exactly who you're talking about, coming in as a starter, a stud. Is he similar trajectory? Yeah. Is he a similar trajectory to someone like Steph Castle? Like, is that kind of in that respect that he's more of like a one and done? Is that the thought process?
It's possible, but here's the thing with Steph Castle, like, and this speaks to, I think, like Steph Castle was, I don't think this is an exaggeration to say, oftentimes the 5th option on that team.
Yep.
And like he ends up being, what was he, the 3rd pick? So like, but he was the 3rd pick because he was in the perfect setting. Because like sometimes it's good to keep these NBA scouts guessing. And, so I think that was like perfect. And I think that's another reason why, in this day and age, I don't know that you can win with, a lot like a lineup full of freshmen anymore. I mean, Duke is doing it as close to anyone. And even that is like, you're seeing it kind of trend towards more of the veterans, like where it's okay, we got 3 freshmen starting. Maybe we have 2, and then it's
right.
So, I don't think the context is going to be the same. I'll say that way of like Braylon coming into a situation like Steph did. But I think I think it's possible that Braylon's productivity as a freshman is greater than Steph's. But I don't know that he will be able to match his draft status after just 1 year. He may be one done, may not. I don't think he'll be the 3rd pick after 1 year, but we'll see. I mean, Braylon, UConn fans should be excited about Braylon. Braylon's a hell of a player.
I think they will. To quote a buddy of mine, the Teen Wolf is coming. The jersey is very similar to the Teen Wolf. Teen Wolf.
Now, can I ask you one quick question?
Of course, man.
So I got my buddy growing up is the reason. Like, I get a text from like my childhood best friend is like, "Hey,
Yeah.
you got to go on the Locked On show." I was like, "How did you find that guy?" Like, no one, like, you know, I was like, "I'll do whatever you." So shout out Coos, I'll do anything he asked me to do. But I was like, how did they find this guy? I was like, "You're going to be my new agent." So I don't know how that happened, but I guess he's a frequent listener of the show. He hit me up. He's like, "Hey, you got to do their show." I was like, "Done."
Yeah, no, I think he DM'd me, and then and then I said, well, I was like, let me, or I don't know if I did it first. I think I maybe saw that he retweeted you, and I was just like, hey, tell Adam to come on the show. I'd love to talk to him. And he was just
Yeah,
like,
he
done.
texted me. He's like, "You got to go on the show." I was like, "Hey, I'll do whatever that guy needs." He was, yeah, he and I were like inseparable growing up. So it's,
Love it.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, awesome, man. I appreciate you you coming on and talking some Husky hoops with us. And yeah, feel free to come back anytime. Would love to have you. So
Yeah, appreciate you having me. It was a good conversation, man. And yeah, we'll look forward to doing it again sometime.
Absolutely. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. For Adam Finklestein, I'm Mark Snetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected. Make sure those toughness meters are always rising. And as always, go Huskies.
Go Huskies.